The importance of these constitutional amendments just cannot be overstated. They are fundamentally important to the Mexican economy and to the future of Mexico as a country. For 75 years, these markets were essentially closed, run by state-owned entities, Pemex and CFE. And then all of a sudden, from one day to the next, these are now going to become competitive markets. Without doubt, there will be enormous investment both in the oil and gas sectors in Mexico and the electricity sector. These industries, which have been until now pretty much closed to private investment, are all of a sudden open game. Mexico is a growing economy, it's a stable economy, and it will certainly attract investors in those areas. So the room for growth is actually there in Mexico. Attracted investment will have room to grow because the economy is an economy in growth. It is an economy that will need oil and gas, it will need petroleum products, and it will need electricity. And therefore, we will see with time as these reforms get implemented, that growth will occur. Fundamentally, these reforms amend certain provisions of the Mexican Constitution to open up the sectors of oil and gas and electricity to private investors. In the oil and gas sector, what essentially happens is that now exploration and production, storage, transportation, and refinement all become open to private investors. Pemex will not cease to exist. It will simply become another competitor in the market. And it will be called an empresa productiva del Estado, which basically means a productive enterprise that is state-owned. What we will expect or will see as a result is that the vertically integrated market of oil and gas will now have competition at each level. In electricity, the reforms to the Constitution pretty much follow what the original proposals of both the PAN and the PRI had stated. CFE will continue to be a player in the market, but a nationalized, centralized grid operator will exist, owned and operated by the state, attracting generation from private generators injected into a national grid for sale to off-takers. There really were no surprises when it came to the amendment of the constitutional provisions. I think the more fundamental changes, where we see changes that deviated from the proposals, occurred in oil and gas. The PRI proposal essentially, or originally, amended one provision of the Constitution to allow for profit-sharing contracts. The new reforms went way beyond that in a very positive way for the industry. Essentially, it will now contemplate various modalities of contracts, not just one. While industry would have pushed for concessions, which would have granted them specific title to the hydrocarbon assets, the Mexican government, or at least the Mexican Congress and the state legislatures, have at least gone as far as I think they possibly could have in light of sort of the sovereignty and cultural issues that attach to oil and gas in Mexico. Currently, or at least as contemplated by these reforms, we'll now see various types of contracts, four at least that have been cataloged by the transitional articles in the constitutional reform: profit-sharing contracts, production-sharing contracts, licenses, and service contracts. But the reforms don't stop there. They went a little further and still said, among others. So secondary legislation will need to determine what other types of contracting mechanisms may need to exist in Mexico, given the circumstances of the country, the economic viability of specific projects, in order to exploit oil and gas assets. Another change that wasn't contemplated in at least the president's proposal is the creation of Senagas, a national center for the control of natural gas, essentially the administrator of all pipelines in Mexico. Pemex will now divest all pipeline assets and related storage facilities to this new entity to be created, which will administer and manage both the assets themselves and also open access rules. The constitutional transitional article specifies that private entities will be able to book an account for reserves for purposes of their financing and their financial statements. However, the requirement for that to operate is that the contract, which evidences their right to book, clearly provide that subsoil hydrocarbon resources belong to the state, to Mexico. With that, we'll be able to at least address one of the more important concerns that the international oil companies had expressed when the proposal had originally come out. SENACE entity. The SENACE entity currently exists. Under the reforms, it will suffer certain modifications to make it an independent entity of CFE and simply a national grid operator. In terms of implementation, the constitutional reforms set forth a timeline, if you will, of sorts. Within 120 days, we should expect to see secondary legislation that will establish the modalities for contracting in the oil and gas fields or sectors in terms of exploration and production, granting of licenses, etc. So we'll have greater definition. Interestingly, however, the new authorities and the existing authorities with enhanced functions won't be determined until legislation is issued approximately 365 days after publication of the constitutional reforms. So there will be a staged effect, if you will, for implementation. But the transitional articles just clearly delineate what that's going to look like. Investors will know essentially when to expect or when to start entering the market on the basis of that legislation. In the context of the implementation, Pemex is going to suffer certain changes. Although it continues to be state-owned and will become an empresa productiva del Estado, the scope and meaning of which isn't altogether clear from the constitutional reforms, but alas, we know it continues to be part of the Mexican state. It will be required to divest itself of certain assets. It will become a competitor within the market. But more importantly, as an initial stage of implementation, it will be entitled to select and determine what fields it will continue to exploit. And so it is charged with presenting a plan of the fields that it intends to continue exploiting for approval by the Ministry of the Economy. In terms of what these constitutional reforms mean for investors, one word: opportunities. Many. Once fully implemented, and once the structure and the framework are there, clearly Mexico will offer opportunities at all levels: exploration and production, transportation and storage, distribution, to private investors. I think that we will see those opportunities multiply in time. The economy is an economy in growth. The country needs the infrastructure because the needs haven't really fully been met by the state-owned enterprises, given budgetary constraints and other technological hindrances. So those opportunities will be there for the main investors, but then also for all the ancillary services that accompany those infrastructure investments. In terms of electricity, well, we've already seen the groundwork laid when it comes to the IPP program in Mexico, self-supply generators, co-generators, and then small suppliers. And we've seen a push for renewables as well. I would expect that with these reforms, those opportunities will just grow more. Now, many opportunities are going to exist for investment, but those opportunities won't come without their challenges. Just noting that Mexico is opening up two very crucial markets, oil and gas and electricity, for the first time in essentially 75 years, there will be difficulties and there will be bumps along the way. Right? Just implementing the legislation, coming up with the legislation, those are just factors that will require a lot of discussion, a lot of analysis. As we go forward and we have new authorities or new authorities with existing authorities, with new functions such as the CRE or the CNH, the Comisión Nacional de Hidrocarburos, well, there will be a learning curve. There will be sort of bumps in the road and growing pains, but that is to be expected. No rollout, no matter where in the world it occurs, happens absolutely seamlessly.